My name is Emma Reeves, and this is my leadership analysis on Nelson Mandela. As an introduction, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was a South African anti-apartheid activist who was the first president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. He was the country's first black head of state, but however, before he became president, he had been imprisoned for 27 years for fighting against apartheid. During his administration, he focused on racial reconciliation and diversifying democracy. Why I chose Nelson Mandela. His strength and dedication stood out to me because Mandela's dedication to ending apartheid for his country is honorable. Even if it meant being imprisoned for a large portion of his life, freedom and equality for his country meant more to him. He is incredibly strong for what he has endured. His involvement in apartheid is another reason that I chose him, because recently, in 2 of my gender studies classes, we have actually discussed South African apartheid. And I'd only known Nelson Mandela because of his Mandela effect, so finding out there was so much more to him was very eye-opening. Another reason was to learn more about him as a leader. Since I have learned that Nelson Mandela is known more than just the Mandela effect, I wanted to gather new information about Mandela and take this opportunity to learn more about him as a leader. Nelson Mandela's history. Nelson Mandela was born in Mvezo, South Africa on July 18, 1918. In his childhood, he was born into a royal family known as the Thembu tribe, where his father was their chief. Sometime in his life, his father had passed when he was only 9 years old, and Mandela was then adopted by a high-ranking Thembu regent who was preparing him for tribal leadership. Becoming a leader. Mandela credits his leadership styles of compromise and conciliation to African traditions practiced in court, which he learned at a very young age. His first experience as an adult with leadership was joining the African National Congress, which advocated for political rights of Black South Africans. Some notable achievements were that he co-founded the first Black legal partnership of South Africa, his speech at the Rivonia trial being marked as the greatest speech of the 20th century, and founded several organizations to promote equality and addressing AIDS. But these are only a very small amount of his many accomplishments. Personality and traits. Mandela's personality/traits were selflessness, forgiveness, compassion, fairness, humility, tolerance, ethical, charismatic, and empathy. Mandela exhibits multiple different leadership styles that I had noticed, and also used the leadership book to figure out which styles related to him based on my research. First is ethical leadership. Mandela's integrity and commitment to social justice and equality showcases his ethical values. He advocated for human rights, equality, and accountability, so much so that he was willing to go to prison over it. Servant leadership. His commitment to serving others and prioritizing other people's needs shows his selflessness. Mandela felt community, equality, and social justice was of the utmost importance. Transformational. Mandela demonstrates his leadership style by inspiring his followers to envision a united nation and to covet community. He also motivated them to think bigger and imagine a world worth fighting for South Africa. Strengths and weaknesses. Some strengths of Mandela's was his ability to deeply connect with people around the world, the media, and the people of South Africa. For example, Mandela would make personal visits to the newspaper offices and engage with journalists. Mandela also had immense emotional integrity and endurance/commitment, which the endurance and commitment relates to him being able to continue this fight even after being jailed for 27 years. So his endurance is immense to this situation that he was so passionate for. And his ability to fight hate with love and compassion is a huge strength, because that's honestly really hard for most people. And it's not something that we see in this day and age with our current leaders. It was hard to find weaknesses on Nelson Mandela, but he is human. So it was noted that he has a sense of detachment when it comes to reflecting on his own identity and legacy. And he was once a more impulsive leader before making this change. A lot of the weaknesses that I stated were once weaknesses of his, but a strength is that he can acknowledge his own weaknesses and make changes to them, because a lot of the weaknesses I mentioned, he'd actually taken time to change his perspective and outlook on these things. So he was no longer an impulsive leader, and he had once held some outdated views on certain topics such as AIDS, but also adapted those opinions and actually ended up advocating for AIDS. He also struggled with dealing with being treated like Superman. Obviously Mandela is human, but a lot of people viewed him as higher than that and kind of Superman-like, and he just kind of struggled to deal with that ideology and the emotions that came with that pressure. Conflict management. Nelson Mandela was mostly known for his negotiation skills, and universities have taken note to this and used it for themselves. Mandela's ability to negotiate with calmness and acceptance allowed him to keep conflict at a minimum. And he has a quote called "making peace with your enemy." This quote of Mandela's to me shows his ability to conflict manage, and Mandela did not feel hatred towards those in opposition of him, which leads to regulated emotions and better actions. Respect. When Mandela was actively opposing the white government's policies, he never compromised. In this situation, that decision was extremely important to gain freedom. But to keep the situation from getting hostile, he was always respectful, even though he was unwilling to compromise his freedom as well as his country's freedom and equality. Addressing diversity. Mandela felt that a nation's strength lied within its diversity, and all of his work has to do with embracing diversity and condemning racial divide. He envisioned and also inspired others to have the same vision of South Africa being a country rich in different cultures and to accept and celebrate their differences. End quote. Our rich and varied cultural heritage has a profound power to help build our nation, quoted by Nelson Mandela. He had made a concept called the Rainbow Nation, which was Mandela's vision for South Africa to be a united and non-racial country. Ethical perspective. Mandela's ethical perspective was centered on radical forgiveness, equality, justice, and human dignity. He fought for and believed in racial equality and also celebrated diversity. He believed all people should be treated equal and hoped South Africa was to become a united nation built on equality. Mandela's leadership effectiveness. Nelson Mandela's visionary leadership style was never motivated by control, power, or personal agenda. Instead, he had the ability to effectively lead because of his influence on the South African people. Mandela empowered others to reach their full potential and use their power as a vessel to come together and make change. Mandela's positive attitude, influence, and commitment is what made him an effective leader. And because of his dedication to his people and country, he was able to make that change into a reality. Takeaways that I got from researching Nelson Mandela was that I learned in order to be a good and effective leader, you do not need to enforce power or make it known that you are in a position of power. I feel like a lot of leaders or bosses in this day and age have a clear position difference between their peers, and it's always known in all aspects of life if somebody is a leader that they are above you and that they are different from you. And I feel like that is what is commonly done with leadership positions nowadays. But Nelson walked with his peers, and he didn't con himself as a person in power. His selflessness, influence, and ethical moral values made him one of the greatest leaders known to mankind. Thank you, and here are my sources.